All right. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about thinking about stories, and then the challenge of actually delivering a story in the retail environment. I spend most of my days in the feeding and watering of retailers and their supplier partners and other constituencies. And what I pulled together here are some, I guess, best practice examples of when it works well. And hopefully you haven't seen some of these, because I'm not talking about Apple and I'm not going to talk about Disney. I'm pulling out some things under some rocks that perhaps and hopefully you haven't seen before. So I have a sort of a different background. I'm actually trained as a cognitive psychologist, and then I spent my years, I've worked for a marketing agency. I've been the head of research for an advertising trade association. I have worked as a consultant for a retail trade agency or a retail trade association, and I've sort of sat at different places at the table, and it helps me, I think some in interesting ways about the problem that presents itself. And I've had a long-standing relationship with the Oxford Institute of Retail Management, although we don't have s'mores at a blues player. It is a meeting point for retailers. We get about several hundred retailers a year pass through the doors. And one of the things that I have to say about Oxford, it's been around for 800 years, although our business school is just about 25 years old. And if nothing else, know that we have 60 pubs on campus, and it's where Harry Potter was filmed. So if that doesn't excite you about Oxford, I don't know what will. Okay, so, what is a story? And, there is a plethora of research that exists on this. So if this floats your boat, storytelling research, there's a lot of information to dig into. But the way I like to think about it is when you think about what is a story, and that actually is a graph of a story on the left, there's chronology and there's causality. There has to be sort of a linear progression. It has to be organized into a beginning and a middle and an end. And then there has to be causality. Stuff happens, people react. Typically, life changes. There's an event, it causes an imbalance. There's usually some tale of restoration. And then depending on the pace, whether there's a lot of up and down movement, then the listener, the viewer, gets deeper and deeper and more engaged into the story. Some of the interesting things that I like to think about stories. I mean, quite frankly, we're just hardwired. We store information in terms of stories, we index it in our brains in terms of stories, and we retrieve it. So the closer that the world delivers information and messages in terms of stories, the better off we are. And one of the interesting findings in terms of neuroscience now is brains of storytellers and listeners actually sync. They actually exhibit the same sort of activity waves. And the most interesting, sexy thing of all, I think, is sometimes a listener, a part of his or her brain will fire as they begin to anticipate the flow of the story. That's exciting. But there's actual synchronicity depending on the story. There's, as I mentioned to you, there's a lot of streams of research around advertising and consumer research. I mean, it shows, there's some nice research that shows that consumers that are exposed to brands that are organized by way of stories, one, they describe brands more favorably, and two, they're actually willing to pay more for them in at least a couple of studies. So there's every benefit to sort of using a story as a cloak for your brands. Brands can be vital props. They can either be central or peripheral, but obviously viable and important mechanism of delivery. So I'm awfully glad you devoted a day to learning about storytelling. But what about storytelling at retail? It's all very good to run a beautiful ad on a print ad or on broadcast, but when you get into a three-dimensional retail environment, it is a horse and a store of a different color. Let's first talk about what a store is. A store is what the retailer is. A store is what the retailer does. The store is the brand, whether it be a house of brands or a brand-owned retail. A store will tell you what the retailer values in his or her brand, how they try to shape a consumer's experience, and whether or not they're succeeding or failing. Now, here's the problem, as they say. The goal of successful retail is to create an environment that engages with consumers' needs, a shopper's needs, and drives them to purchase. But that's simpler than it actually is. There's so many deficiencies in retail that makes it quite quite a bit of a difficult thing to do. Now, as stores begin to progress, one of the number one things that retailers tried to do in the early days was develop assortment. More and more assortment. More is better. More and more is better. And that philosophy exists today, that part of being a retailer of size and scale and import meant that you had products that people wanted. Well, from a consumer standpoint, that meant you had a lot of product proliferation and in many cases duplication, clutter, visual clutter, whether it was signs or brands or just simply 37 SKUs of toothpaste. It begins to be very confusing. And as we do research where we shop along and you stand in front of an OTC or an analgesic counter and literally some consumers will just literally start to shut down because you've taxed their information system with so many choices, the burden of choice. So in the retail environment, you have lots and lots of brands and many, many brands shouting at you. And the last thing that I'll say is the shopping journey itself is no longer sequential. It used to sort of proceed. You would be at home watching an ad on your TV. You would learn about a great new product. You would go to the store. You would walk down the aisle of the store. You would make your decisions between two brands, and then you would walk out and tell your neighbor what a great TV you just bought. It no longer happens like that. The shopper journey is no longer linear. It's recursive. Sometimes they just skip it entirely. So all of this is just to say the retail environment is a pretty tough bear. It's very difficult to control and manage the brand message within this environment. Be that as it may, there are some retailers that are standout in terms of how they're able to pull this off. And here they are. Actually, before here they are, I want to tell you just a couple things about, now if you look at how retailers typically tell stories, it's in three different ways. This has been sort of the history of how retailers begin to involve consumers in their brands. The first way is through product demonstrations and sampling, obviously exposing and getting consumers to interact with the brand so they can directly experience the functional benefits of a given brand. And any sort of sensor engagement is a good thing. Touch it, try it, feel it, taste it. It's good. The other ways in which retailers typically storytell is this idea of retailtainment, which is creating an event or an experience inside a store which is greater than the sum of its collective product parts. So, in other words, creating a store as a theater. And this was the bailiwick, if you will, of the great department store chains of the 19th century. Department stores were created to be theatrical areas where you could watch commerce and buy stuff too, but mainly watch people shop. And another way in which retailers try to tell stories is they have, very few of them are able to pull off the grander objective of creating a community center where like-minded enthusiasts, whether you're a technology enthusiast or you're in fashion or you're a foodie, can convene and explore and discover and learn. And then finally, I don't have this on here because there's already been a lot of talk today devoted to it. You know, there are some new trends in the use of different digital technologies. Facebook retailers just beginning to get active and using websites to engage in conversations with, especially their more loyal shoppers. But this is typically what's been in the toolbox of a retailer wanting to engage with their consumers by virtue of a story. I'm going to show you one picture. It's one of my very, very favorite pictures, and this is courtesy of a colleague at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana. What you're looking at is the difference between a browser and a shopper, and this it matters. The point I'm going to make is the retail environment is all the more complex because people come in with different goals and objectives. So here we are shopping for a chocolate donut. Okay. Now, if you look at the set. Here's a browser not really interested in a chocolate donut. That's where she's looking. She's sort of looking in the center of the aisle, in the center of the set, and that's really all she's looking at. She's just sort of she's taken a quick look and a quick fixation. Now, the one on the right is somebody who wants a donut. So she's looking at the chocolate, but then she goes over to the vanilla and she scans down to the strawberry and she goes over to jelly filled, and then she goes back up because she really wants that chocolate. Why do we care? Because understanding what the shopper mission is also is another variable to consider, because sometimes you don't want to tell the same story to the shopper. You have to understand what it is in many cases they're looking for, so you can find a way to actually merchandise and actually develop your store. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about product demonstrations. As we know, anything that drives engagement with a product is going to influence the purchase decision. And so some of the great examples of this include, obviously, testers at beauty stores, cooking schools at grocery stores, any way that sort of gets consumers to interact with the product. There was an interesting study that Disney shared with me at Once Upon a Toy, which is their on-park retail stores. And they were trying to figure out a way to move sales by virtue of their vitrines. And they took out some of their figurines out of the packaging, and this drove sales by about 40%. Why? Because they put them at eye level, and the kids could actually see what was in the packaging. Huge, enormous kinds of effects. There's an outdoor retailer in Canada called Mountain Equipment Corp, and they literally unfurl their sleeping bags and they hang them in the front of the store, and this drives sales tremendously of sleeping bags, which are normally tightly bundled up and put in the back of the store. So lots of different kinds of things. Here are some of the best practices. Sports Check is a sporting goods retailer in Germany. And sporting goods stores are wonderful places to let consumers interact with and try the product, to allow them to demonstrate products. One of the favorite devices in this particular store, very simple, not difficult, is they have on some of their ski helmets, they have helmet cameras that can actually be used in store and tested before you buy them. They have simple devices like digital windows in the hiking department, so you have changing panoramic scenes, just so you feel like you're more involved in something that you care about. If you're an avid skier or a hiker, that's relevant. So a very simple device. There's another sporting goods retailer called Decathlon in France, and they are so big you can actually windsurf inside of the store. You can literally try. They've got a bike track. They've got air mattresses on rocks, on beds of rocks, so you can literally try everything before you buy it. We should see more of this at retail. Unfortunate that we don't. Another favorite of mine is a pharmacy of the future in Amsterdam, Apotheek Lares, and this is a very interesting pharmacy. Does anybody see the archetypal image to the left of the store? It's kind of hard to see. It's the tree of life, something important if you're going to create a healing environment. That's actually a ginkgo biloba tree that grows up in the center of the pharmacy. And as often as I bring drugstore retailers to see this store in the Netherlands, none of them will put a live tree in the center of the pharmacies. You can only do what you can do. But this pharmacist believes that pharmacists should be about healing. And so the store is round. We have the symbolism of circles for healing. It has a healing garden outside of the store, so you can actually understand, since many pharmaceuticals come from botanicals, and the only thing they don't grow in that garden is, of course, marijuana, because you can get that anywhere in Amsterdam. But here, you can actually go in the healing garden. You can learn about what goes into the pharmaceuticals. You can actually sit and wait while your script is filled in a very pleasant garden outside. What she's also done is, the way the store is shaped is, those are all drawers. So you have conventional and alternative medicine side by side. So part of what you can do, 522 translucent drawers, so it's as if you're standing at a giant medicine chest, and you can pull out and you can see and compare and think and learn about what different kinds of things you might be able to use. And the last thing that she does that's quite spectacular is she stumbled onto the insight that, and I don't know if anybody, actually raise your hands if you can relate to this. She found in the Netherlands that when the pharmacist in his or her white jacket disappears and goes to the back to fill your script, consumers got tense. So she built complete. Can anybody relate to that? It's not like you're overtly thinking, "Oh my gosh, what are they putting in my pill box?" But she found that when she created perfect transparency to the back of the house, the back of the pharmacy, the consumers felt much calmer. Something very simple, something very sweet, something that would be great to see more of. So a green pharmacy of the future. Now, this particular store just announced a few days ago that they were closing, but it still doesn't mean we can't mine what they've done for some useful nuggets. And this is it was a relatively new, ran for about a year concept from American Eagle, and they just created interactivity into the store. They understood that kids actually need to interact with the environment and to sort of tell the story of where the different products came is kids could actually watch a t-shirt being printed. So they put a little factory inside of their flagship store location. And they could look at different grades and colors of denim pants being made, and that was all very very interesting and very impactful. And of course, they had the usual stuff that you see more and more now. But very very important ways of getting consumers to interact with product inside of the retail environment. Was anybody in London when this watch brand ran this great augmented reality promotion, which is so this is out in the storefront on Oxford Street. It's an interactive wall on their display windows, and literally you would put on a paper, the people who were doing the demo would hand out paper wristbands, and as you put it up to the display window, it would just show different virtual watches, and this totally drove sales. It brought people obviously inside of the big box store, or the big department store, and it drove sales in a very clever, impactful, interesting way, all by virtue of demonstration. The other tool that retailers have is what's known as retailtainment. I'm going to give you two quotes, my two favorite quotes. "We've come a long way from donkey rides and balloons in our parking lot." That was from the Vice President of Marketing at Walmart. And Walt Disney, "People spend where and when they feel good." So the idea of retailtainment is actually creating a store environment that's more experiential. These days, more digital is enhancing the ability for stores to be more experiential. But there are some even simple things that you can do even without technology. So it becomes an immersive experience where even for just a minute you can step outside of your life and inside of a particular environment. Now, I will say a little bit about Disney here. I guess it would be inappropriate to talk about storytelling in retail if I didn't at least acknowledge Disney. And they are masterful storytellers, don't get me wrong. There's retail, and as many say, then there's Disney. And their objective, I love this, to be the best 30 minutes in a child's day. And so what they did was they worked hard, and you can see that in their flagship store, but it's rolling out to all of their mall stores. They're now really the only specialty toy store in most of our malls. And they just decided they needed to do a better job telling stories inside the environment. So they did it actually by creating storytelling neighborhoods, discrete neighborhoods. Because when you've got different shoppers on different trips, as we talked about earlier, it gets complicated fast. So but by creating segmentation in the store, by actual neighborhoods, this worked pretty well. They brought in more live events. They actually had a little pixie dust trail to move their little shoppers through the store. They had an interactive magic mirror. Does anybody know about the magic mirror? Magic mirror device where your daughter would put on her little princess dress, and through the magic mirror would come her favorite princess to talk to her and tell her how wonderful she looked in that Cinderella dress. So very, very simple, but obviously taking and escalating the idea of storytelling that much further. Early on, their results, their traffic numbers increased by about 25%, and their sales increased about 30%. So properly deployed, this stuff works. So one of the concepts I want to talk about is one of the very, very first, we talk about curation now as if it's existed forever. This is one of the very first retailers in Paris that actually came upon this idea of curating a store. Now, this is the store as a media channel. The person that developed this store very much wanted to create a store that was like a magazine. Sometimes we talk about stores as three-dimensional press kits. Sometimes we talk about stores as actual media channels. When I was the head of research for Popeye, one of the things I had to do was actually work and develop an in-store GRP to make in-store advertising a measured medium. That was a fun project for a couple of years. Needless to say, we didn't quite get there, but we worked really hard. So this is the idea of really, particularly in the beauty and skincare environment where you have hundreds and hundreds of brands and it's confusing and it's overwhelming, you need somebody to curate for you. And so, and in beauty stores, you have stories come to life. Beauty stores are all about transformational self-mastery. Hopefully there's a fairy godmother in the form of a nice clerk in the back who will help guide you to the products that are going to transform you into whomever you want to be. And this, what they did actually in particular was using messaging on the walls and sort of editorial at retail. It looked quite different than anything that we had seen before. Even the window was sort of a trend page. They would update the window with different trends pretty quickly. And they also did the store within a store concept. They had 3 rooms and using color and lighting developed sort of different offers which would encourage different shoppers and different trips. This is a relatively new concept. There's new ice cream stores opening up all the time. This is a bespoke ice cream store that's just opened up in London. And here's what's cool about this. Apparently, nitrogen is cold enough to make ice cream instantaneously, and it doesn't form big ice crystals either. So this particular offer has reinvented the process, but they also create a spectacle. You know, one of the things that we see in supermarkets today and a lot of food services, the process isn't transparent. They don't let consumers look inside. And this is really a lab for ice cream. They've got a couple of crazy scientists, and they make all kinds of crazy flavors. Like I had grilled corn sorbet there. Now, okay, say what you will, not for everybody, but it was experimental, and they could try different things. And they have the entire store set up as, you know, different workstations. That's literally the ice cream store. It looks like your chemistry lab in the 9th grade, you know. And so, but by opening up every stage and letting the consumers look inside, they involve the consumer. So all of a sudden now you can charge $14 for an ice cream cone. It's a wonderful thing. Go Chin Chin. Okay, I guess popcorn ice cream is coming out now, but this idea of true lab stores is something that we'll see over and over again. I think I have a couple last pictures there. There's the nitrogen going to work. It's like, I need one of these at my house now. This is great. And then even the toppings are in beakers and jars. So they've played out this offer pretty dramatically. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll kind of talk about is what is the holy grail for many retailers, which is how can we be a community center for our consumers? Every retailer out there wants to build a sense of community among their consumers. Obviously, we shop the Apple Store because we want to be part of the Apple family. I don't know if we necessarily shop the Walgreens store because we want to be part of the Walgreens family. You have to have a special offer and a special environment to be able to pull that off. So, and it's simply more than just chairs in a circle. I think when stores are able to pull off stores as community center, they have to have the right environment. It has to facilitate interaction and discovery and exchange. It has to have knowledgeable, passionate associates. This is so critical. There's a store in Brazil called Daslu, and they hire, it's a very high-end luxury fashion store, and they only hire from the same social economic strata as their customers. So the sales clerk that's waiting on you will possibly be, you know, the Minister of Trade's daughter. And that's all good because she is into passion, and it's a big deal for her to work in retail. But a knowledgeable, passionate associate is another thing that's critical and hard to pull off. And the third thing is events. You have to be able to deploy events, do them very well. Those are some of the core components of retailers that are able to pull off community centers. Now, there's some that do a great job. Does anybody know Roots in Canada, the clothing retailer? They had a big role. You know, I don't know if you know this, but in their flagship store on Bloor Street, they actually have an in-store bar. They've got a permanent bar built in because they use the store so often to do special events that they've actually just built a bar in the store. Now, you can't necessarily see it, but they can pull it out and do something like the Toronto Film Fest and all those wonderful things. Does anybody know Fnac? Fnac, wonderful European retailer. You know, they do probably 15,000 events a year, sponsoring, promoting local artistic talent, photography, literary functions, lectures. But the point is they carve out a big space inside of their stores. Now, if you're a retailer, work with retailers, you know, that already sends palpitations to your heart. It's empty space, and you have to agree that that you're going to make a commitment to do events. And Fnac is phenomenal at doing culture events in particular. And Couche-Tard is the last retailer that I'll talk about quickly here before showing you some physical examples. Couche-Tard, does anybody know Couche-Tard in Canada? They own Circle K here in the U.S. Couche-Tard actually, as early as 2000, was creating the most fantastic convenience stores you'd ever seen. They had leather recliners in them. They had beautiful carpets. They had fantastic design. But what they did that was really interesting is they had 3 designs. 1 minute, okay. And the employees could actually vote on the design, and that reduced their employee turnover for them. So who does a good job of meeting points? National Geographic has opened up a few stores. What's great about this, the store is actually on the Greenwich Meridian line. How good is that? But in their basement, they just do unique merchandising. This is not hard to do. That in there is a testing room where you can put on one of their parkas. It's actually Arctic grade temperatures, so you can actually test if this darn parka is going to keep you warm when you're out there. And it does, obviously, a lot of different things. They sell everything from one-of-a-kind furniture to photographs. They do lots of great things. 2 more really quickly. a new bookstore, speaking of wonderful bookstores, that's opened up in Tokyo, which is targeted to 50-plus old consumer. It's 120,000 square feet, 3-story building. It's got everything. It's quite fantastic. It has a place where you can drop your dog off to get groomed. You can get a couple of groceries. You can pick up some books. When you enter the store, they hand you an iPad. You order your latte. You get to browse the one-of-a-kind art collection. It's got the largest selection of pens. It's definitely a bit of a hodgepodge, but it's very carefully focused on two things: that 50-plus consumer and an intersection of new and old media. It's still books, but you also have some other points of entry as well. So some very nice things. Here's my favorite part. Look, for those of you with dogs, they've got like a permanent dog leash holder right outside their store. I love that. Okay, I know, I get a little excited about the tiniest things. And I have saved the pièce de résistance for last, my favorite store. Also in Asia, Kids Republic Bookstore. So this is a most amazing store. So in Asia, as you know, books are mostly about learning, not so often about fun and play. But when you talk about children's book with their bright and colorful covers, in order to showcase the product as hero, you should create an environment that actively does that. And so this entire environment is a 200 square meter bookstore. It's devoted to children. It is a fantastic homage to discovery and learning, and it does a couple things. Do you see that rainbow? That is a rainbow road. It starts at the front of the store. It goes through every single piece of the store, and guess where it ends up? Come on. At the cash wrap. Beautiful. So not only does the kid and her mom travel every piece of that store, including the back where it's really hard, is they end up where they need to be. There's also a lot of attention paid to the floor, the ceiling, the walls, and the furniture, which normally retailers don't focus on. But to a child, they're relevant because children like to get around and crawl and tuck around. And this is quite interesting. It's not necessarily a Disneyfication of a store, but it's a more sophisticated look at the kinds of design strategies that kids need. What's this? This is an arch that represents a gateway into another world. You want to talk about stories in the retail environment? Kids flood through the door and they enter the imagination world of their dreams. And then the last piece, there's just all kinds of nooks and crannies. Now you see this upper nook with this kid? It's facing outside. So when you're on the street, you see a kid in a window. What do? You walk in the store. How cool is that? The store's not large, but the way it looks different from every different angle, it gives the perception of endless variety, brilliant design, all about fun and discovery. And just two closing slides. So lots and lots of change ahead for retailers. Consumers are getting more sophisticated, and it's getting much more difficult to talk and have conversations with consumers in the retail environment. But we've talked a lot about, or there's a lot of interest in online and e-commerce now. I say we still need to get the store right. Stores will always be a part of our heritage and our future. People will always need stores for some things. And so there's a renaissance right now for retailers looking at different ways to activate and energize the store. So please don't forget about our bricks and mortar. And just to tie into some of the earlier speakers, I'll just close with the following ideas. I mean, I think the conversational framework that INFLUX has worked up is fantastic, because in the future retailers need to do a lot less shouting and talking at people, and instead do more listening and having conversations with people, finding the right conversations to have with consumers, and is what the future of retail will hinge on in the future. So thank you for your time. Great to be here.